This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show.
Today, Enda will be talking about Shirley Hazzard's The Transit of Venus.
And Poetry and Money, a Speculation. Peter will be talking about a book by poet and writer Peter Robinson, published by Liverpool University Press.
And today's Toaster Challenge guest is poet Leeanne Quinn, whose new collection, Some Lives, has just been published by Daedalus Press.
So, the coffee's made.
The toast is on.
And the books are on the table.
And you have a novel on the breakfast table by a writer people may not know very well. A writer who had a very interesting life in her younger years before she even became a writer.
Yes, that's right. The writer that I want to talk about today is the novelist Shirley Hazzard. And in many ways, I think Shirley Hazzard's experiences as a young person came to shape her later as a writer. Her intelligence, her international spirit, so evident in her books. I often think they must have spawned... these must have all come from her early experiences, her early years of travel.
Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Yeah, of course. Shirley Hazzard was born in Sydney in Australia in 1931, and she travelled the world in her early years with her parents who were diplomats. And her childhood in Australia was filled with reading. She said of poems that she ate and drank them up as nourishment. But also there was a lot of, I think, family discord. There was alcoholism, there was mental illness on her mother's side, there was infidelity on her father's, and ultimately that marriage did disintegrate. But at 16, living in Hong Kong, she was engaged by British intelligence, and between 1947 and 1948 she was involved in monitoring the civil war in China. Now, we have a nearly 16-year-old daughter. Can you imagine if she was engaged in such activity?
I don't know, I think Freya would make a pretty good spy.
It would be interesting, wouldn't it? But anyway, after this, Shirley Hazzard lived in New Zealand and in Europe and the United States, and she worked there for the United Nations Secretariat in New York, and she divided her time between Italy. And in 1963, she married the writer Francis Steegmuller, and she met him. He was a Flaubert scholar, he was a writer and translator, but she met him at a party given by Muriel Spark, which sounds very, very exciting, I think. And they married later that year. He died in 1994, and she kind of, as I said, moved between Italy and New York, and she herself died in 2016.
But literary success came to her pretty easily, didn't it?
Yeah, and without, I have to say, the usual onslaught of rejection slips, which so often many writers experience. Her long association with The New Yorker began with the first story she submitted, Woolhurrah Road, which had been pulled from the slush pile by the editor of the time, William Maxwell, and published in 1961. And as many of you know, William Maxwell was such an important editor and got so many writers published. But speaking of Italy, she loved Italy, and she wrote a book, Graham Greene in Capri, a memoir of Graham Greene. Italy was such a magic place for her. She said the mysteries remain important, the accidental quality of existence, the poetry of memory, the impassioned life that is animated by awareness of eventual death. But she wrote 5 books of fiction. She wrote books such as The Evening of the Holiday, which is kind of Henry Jamesian, about an affair between an older Italian man and a young half-English visitor. She wrote another book called The Bay of Moon. And at this stage, this was published in 1970. You could see her writing was becoming more expansive, slightly Henry James influence still there. And then there were 2 collections of stories. There was a brilliant novel, The Great Fire, which won the National Book Award for Fiction in 2003 and the Miles Franklin Award in 2004, and it was shortlisted for the Orange Prize in 2004 and the Booker for that year too.
I suppose all these books are fantastic achievements, but the novel you want to talk about today is one which you feel is a bit different from those, isn't that right?
Yeah, I think the novel I want to talk about is her novel The Transit of Venus, which was first published 41 years ago in 1980 and 23 years before her previous novel. And I think actually great readers of Shirley Hazzard often were very put out about the fact that it took her so long to write another novel after it. But it still stands out, I think, as one of the finest novels of the 20th century. I mean, where did it come from? When I read it, I first thought I'd never read anything quite like it. And it's been fascinating for me as well to read of other writers' responses to the book. And they've often remarked on in the book saying that you really only kind of get the greatness of the book when you go back and you read it again. Some have even written of their early resistance to the book. They didn't really like it. They had to return to it later, and then they were shocked by its brilliance. So even Hazzard's husband, Francis Stiegmuller, remarked that nobody should ever have to read this book for the first time, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? And in one sense, The Transit of Venus is a love story. A young astronomer comes to study with an older eminent one in England in the 1950s, and he meets and falls in love with the astronomer's Australian ward, a girl named Caroline Bell. And the next 30 years of his life will be dedicated to his possibly seemingly fruitless pursuit of her.
Interesting plot so far, but what actually makes the book so good?
I know, it is an interesting plot. It sounds in a way like it could be an effective but minor novel, doesn't it, Peter? But of course, it's far from that. Hazzard's triumph is that she politicises the plot by sending Caroline, or Caro as she calls her, to work in a government office, by making young Ted Tice's argument over the placement of a telescope a matter of revolutionary conviction. And Hazzard has greater things, if there are greater things, on her mind than love, I think, in this novel, which makes it really interesting.
And lots of travel too, isn't that right?
Yeah, travel. And of course, that goes back, as I said, to her early years when she travelled so much as a young person. The novel moves from rural England to Australia, to London, to South America, to Stockholm, to New York, and its people, of course, move too. There's a brilliant description of LA written in a letter by a playwright named Paul Ivory in the book. He writes a letter from a hotel and he says, "So far, California offers the greatest contrast imaginable between the works of God and the desecrations of man. California is a beautiful woman with a foul tongue."
And does she have much to tell us about the politics of that time?
Yeah, well, the various forms of unrest that kind of ripple through the 60s and 70s are very present throughout the book as well. So, for instance, there's a quote that says, "In America, a white man had been shot dead in a car and a black man on a veranda. In Russia, a novelist had emerged from hell to announce that beauty would save the world. Russian tanks rolled through Prague while America made war in Asia. In Greece, the plays of Aristophanes were forbidden. In China, the writings of Confucius. On the old world, history lay like a paralysis. In France, the generals died. In Italy, a population abandoned the fields forever to make cars or cardigans in factories, and economists called this a miracle."
What else do you like about it?
Well, I suppose there are no spoilers in this novel. We learn on page 12 that the protagonist will eventually commit suicide, but we don't really know why until the end. And I like that. I love that structure. Also, I love that she conveys complex dramas with kind of an austere economy of words. And they're slim books, but they've winding sentences, which I like. She said herself that speech in literature, as in life, can crucially suggest what is not said. So I think her intelligence goes full tilt in this novel, The Transit of Venus. And I think her simple descriptive powers are highly memorable. Each sentence, sometimes I actually feel, is kind of like a mini masterpiece when you're reading them. So, for instance, would you like to hear the opening, just to convince you, Peter, of her wonders?
Yeah, sure I would.
First line says, "By nightfall, the headlines would be reporting devastation. It was simply that the sky on a shadeless day suddenly lowered itself like an awning. Purple silence petrified the limbs of trees, and stood crops upright in the fields like hair on end. Whatever there was of fresh white paint sprang out from downs or dunes, or lacerated a roadside with a streak of fencing. This occurred shortly after midday on a summer Monday in the south of England." What an amazing opening paragraph. But really, though, the book's achievement goes beyond style and even beyond structure. The characters, I think, kind of exist within and at the mercy of a possible wider cosmos. There's a wonderful kind of mystery to this book. And actually, I was struck by the New York Times reviewer Anatole Broyard. He said it was a dose of the sublime. There were sentences that brought tears of gratification to my eyes, he said. And John Banville himself, he's another great fan of this book. He said it's intricately plotted and gorgeously written. But he said a peculiar and powerful sense of evil hangs over the narrative, so that even as one is impelled towards the conclusion, one at the same time is fearful of getting there. And I think that's really astute reading of her book. She can be a difficult read, and she sets up a sense of certainty, but then she destroys it. She kind of capsizes the reader over and over again, which I think is what makes it a great novel to return to again and again, which is in a way where we started talking about this book. It's a book which which I think really benefits from reading it again. And it opens with a shipwreck. But I don't want to say, speaking of, a book kind of capsizing you, but I don't want to say anything more other than I would urge readers to read this fantastic novel by Shirley Hazzard.
Well, that's some recommendation. So I certainly will be looking forward to having a look at this novel that was ended talking about the Transit of Venus by Shirley Hazzard. And it's published by Penguin Random House. And details, as usual, will be on the website, booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com.
So, Peter, what have you got on the table this week?
Yeah, I've got an interesting book called Poetry and Money, a Speculation by Peter Robinson, published by the Liverpool University Press.
Peter Robinson, that's interesting actually. You've got his book here because do you remember we went and saw him reading in the wonderful Books Upstairs? I think it was, in the times before lockdown, and it was great to hear him. He's a really fine poet. He's published loads of books. He's also professor of English and American literature at the University of Reading. He's the editor of Two Rivers Press, and he's won lots of prizes for his work. So I'm really interested to hear about this book because poetry and money, it's not something that we normally associate together. So it seems a little bit unlikely in a way, doesn't it, Peter?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I suppose what this book is a study of, if you like, the relationships between poetry and money. And he kind of goes from Chaucer to contemporary times. So there's lots in it of interest. I mean, it's not just, I suppose, money, but what money represents, like a system of value or trust. So he's kind of investigating where poetry fits into that. And, he gives plenty of examples of poetic hardship over the centuries. There's poetry using economics as metaphor. There's ideas of debt and interest and repayment coming into it, for instance, religious poetry. So if you think about it, money is so huge in everyone's life. It would be amazing if it didn't also spill into the life of poets and poetry. But I can't think of any other book that looks at this subject, or certainly that covers it so exhaustively.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. And listen, Peter, where does he begin?
Well, he goes back to Chaucer, but really the book begins in a creative writing class that isn't going particularly well. And when Peter Robinson asks, he's got a story by somebody in the class, he says, "Is this any good?" And he gets the answer, "Well, I wouldn't pay money to read it." Mm-hmm. To which someone else in the class responds, "Well, in fact, you're paying £9,000 a year to read it." And immediately you're into this kind of realization that knowledge is part of the money economy, that it has an identifiable monetary value. In the UK context, a £9,000 loan and the 6% interest that's charged on that debt post-graduation,
Yeah, it's very interesting. And where is poetry in that calculation?
Yeah, well, indeed. Where is poetry in a capitalist economy? Nowhere, really, I suppose. It's without economic value. It doesn't even pretend to replicate the norm of work as prose does. He quotes an article by Charles Simic on this point, and as usual, Simic makes his points pithily. Everyone has heard of poems being read at marriage ceremonies and funerals, but I expect nobody's ever tried to inflict a chapter of a novel or short story on that kind of gathering. No wonder writers and intellectuals, by and large, disdain poetry. Poets work for nothing, Tim Parks says. In other words, they turn poems out the way a sweatshop in a third world country turns out cheap toys. And more infuriatingly, most poems are short. They give the impression it took no time to write them. 10 minutes tops. To write a 600-page novel takes years. You go and work at your desk every day the way a miner goes to his mine, and you feel drained afterwards. Of course, that kind of work should be amply rewarded. A poet stands by the window watching the rain fall, or looks at a lock of hair of his old sweetheart, or scribbles down something on a piece of paper, and that's through for the day. The most outrageous thing about poetry is that poems composed in such a lackadaisical manner end up in anthologies your kids are supposed to study in school. Not only that, but they may fall in love with them, memorize them, and try to imitate them. So that was old Charles Simic. So poetry is, it's this kind of slightly outrageous, disreputable thing which perversely may acquire a lasting cultural value, but you can't monetize it. It's not a career choice. No parent is going to probably welcome their child coming into them and saying, I'm going to be a poet. And it didn't work. Didn't particularly work in a communist economy either. I mean, he quotes, for instance, the famous trial of Joseph Brodsky when he's asked by the judge, who has recognized you as a poet? Who has enrolled you in the rank of poets?
Yeah, and I suppose that's always the big question, isn't it?
It is, and there's only one answer, and the answer is no one. To be a poet is a condition, not a profession, Robert Graves said. And it was interesting because I heard Moya Cannon quoting that at her launch, the launch of her collected poems on Zoom recently. So the book, he's looking in at these questions of value and worth and money. Just because poetry doesn't have a monetary value as such doesn't, of course, mean that poets aren't interested in or obsessed even by money. Whether they sign up to the regular economy like the, bank clerk Elliot or insurance man Wallace Stevens or Dr. Williams or hustle for their living on campuses.
Yeah, and then also, I'm thinking, just listening to you there, I'm thinking of Robert Graves when he said there's no money in poetry, but then there's no poetry in money either.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that, like, Peter Robinson would argue that the second part of that isn't actually true. His book is effectively saying that there is poetry in money, and in fact he quotes the very same Graves who wrote a poem lamenting the loss of the old money, the old coins, pounds, shillings and pence, and he kind of moves on to consider lots of poems about money. The poet as supplicant looking for patronage. And this is where he comes back to Chaucer writing to his purse, his poem to his purse, or Wordsworth being grateful for a financial gift, or a bedridden Ben Jonson in 1631 writing for support with great dignity. Trying to persuade a patron to part with some money to help him in his sickness and age.
Yeah, and there are plenty of poems about deprivation or poets encountering desperation, aren't there? Think about Elizabeth Bishop.
Writing about a beggar in Rio. He quotes also poems about what he calls unglamorous solidarity, which is, when the poet writes from within the experience, because lots of poets have been poor. He talks about, for instance, Gwendolyn Brooks, Street in Bronzeville from the collection of that name, describing an apartment building in a poor Chicago neighborhood.
Actually, you know what, Peter, just listening to you there, I think it might be worthwhile hearing that poem by Gwendolyn Brooks in full. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then you can hear her actually reading it on the Poetry Foundation site. And just to say, a kitchenette in America, for those of you who don't know, means a small apartment which is often cut out of a larger one. So I'm going to read this for you now. Kitchenette Building by Gwendolyn Brooks. We are things of dry hours and the involuntary plan, greyed in and grey. Dream makes a giddy sound, not strong like rent, feeding a wife, satisfying a man. But could a dream send up through onion fumes its white and violet, fight with fried potatoes and yesterday's garbage ripening in the hall, flutter or sing an aria down these rooms, even if we are willing to let it in, had time to warm it, keep it very clean, anticipate a message, let it begin? We wonder. But not well, not for a minute. Since number 5 is out of the bathroom now, we think of lukewarm water, hope to get in it.
It's great to hear that.
I think I should probably have been reading it in an American accent.
Well, as I say, because there is a great recording of her reading it. It's a great poem. It's a great book.
And I love that thing of number 5 is out of the bathroom now, it's really good. And you're dreaming of lukewarm water. Yeah, it's excellent. Great voice going on in that poem. And you had a poem as well, Peter, from the book, didn't you, by Kathleen Raine, that Peter Robinson actually discusses. And I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, since we're in kind of poem reading mood, I mean, it's actually from a discussion later in the book about contracts and profits. But it kind of fits in well here because it's the ultimate sort of money worry poem. And that's, in fact, what it's called. Worry and money. Wearing worry about money like a hair shirt, I lie down in my bed and wrestle with my angel. My bank manager could not sanction my continuance for another day, but life itself wakes me each morning, and love urges me to give, although I have no money in the bank at this moment and all property, to cease to exist in a world where poverty is a shameful and ridiculous offence. Having no one to advise me, I open the Bible and shut my eyes and put my finger on a text and read that the widow with a young son must give first to the prophetic genius from the little there is in the bin of flour and the cruse of oil.
It's amazingly honest, isn't it, that poem? It's amazing the way she's so clear about her poverty. And what does she do? She opens the Bible. It's brilliant, isn't it? So I think poetry is amazing like that. So that was Peter reading Worry and Money, a brilliant poem by Kathleen Raine.
And I'm glad, because I'm glad Peter Robinson resurrected that poem as well, because it doesn't make it to Raine's collected poems. It's almost as just something too kind of shameful about it. And indeed, I suppose poets have been always have been ambivalent about, their position in that kind of, if you like, bank manager's view of the world. Robinson also quotes Saul Bellows Humboldt in Humboldt's Gift, and that's supposed to be based on Delmore Schwartz, the poet.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I'll read that bit where he's explaining his obsession. And he says, the reason is that we're Americans after all. What kind of American would I be if I were innocent about money, I ask you? Things have to be combined as Wallace Stevens combined them. Who says money is the root of evils? Isn't it the pardoner? Well, the pardoner is the most evil man in Chaucer. No, I go along with Horace Walpole. Walpole said it was natural for free men to think about money. Why? Because money is freedom. That's why.
Yeah, and it's great. It's great to hear that. And I actually want to go back to Ben Jonson, because the famous poem.
Oh, about his dead son. That
one,
yeah.
About his dead. I mean, it's one of the most striking and heartbreaking poems in the language. And I didn't realize, but there's an extraordinary account of a dream that Jonson had before his son died in the plague. And his son comes to him in a dream with a bloody cross gashed on his forehead in the form of a young man rather than a boy. Mm-hmm. The shape Jonson figures that he would have had at their resurrection. Mm-hmm. But the poem's extraordinary for, it's built on this whole notion of debt, that, this idea that his son was lent to him by God for 7 years, and that now, in a sense, he has to repay that debt.
Yeah. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. My sin was too much hope of thee, loved boy. 7 years thou wert lent me, and I thee pay, exacted by thy fate on the just day. Yeah, I mean, it's such a strange idea, and like the metaphor, as Robinson reminds us, that Jonson on the day of his son's death is obliged to repay the debt that his birth and life incurred. I mean, that whole chapter is about indebtedness and redemption. And he looks at George Herbert, who uses lots of financial imagery in religious poems, or Donne's valediction of weeping, let me pour forth my tears before thy face, whilst I stay here, for thy face coins them, and thy stamp they bear, and by this mintage they are something worth. I mean, there's lots of other stuff here. I mean, there's a whole section on the South Sea bubble and poetry. There's Tennyson and money. And of course, you'd have to have Ezra Pound, without whom no discussion of poetry and money would be complete. And pretty much everything he had to say on the subject was obnoxious and anti-Semite and so on. So, Peter, Poetry and Money, a speculation by Peter Robinson. Does he come to an essential conclusion, or is there any conclusion in the book? Well, I mean, the book, I suppose, basically it's grappling with the notion that both poetry and money are, as he says, ways of attributing value to the world, but that the kinds of attribution and value are inevitably different and themselves differently valued. I mean, I just think that they run on two different tracks that maybe sometimes collide. It's like he quotes the hard-nosed poem by Frost, provide, which is your poet's, if you like, go-to investment plan. Make the whole stock exchange your own, if need be. Occupy a throne where nobody can call you crone. Some have relied on what they knew, others on being simply true. What worked for them might work for you. No memory of having starred atones for later disregard, or keeps the end from being hard. Better to go down dignified with boughten friendship at your side than none at all. Provide. And I don't know if that's American, the kind of American work ethic meeting poetry, a sort of Puritan legacy that sanctifies independence and self-reliance, or if it's Frost being ironic about the place of creativity in a society which marginalizes it. So I'm not sure, but maybe it's kind of symptomatic of the queasy relationship between the two economies that are kind of fundamentally at loggerheads. I mean, I think, there isn't much really in this book about poetry outside of English, and it's, in a way, it's quite male centered as well. But, I think of the question posed by all those centuries ago by Mahun O'Hiffernan as he traipsed around Munster in the 16th century, Ceist
Kia Chianoch Dawn, who will buy a poem, trying to find somebody who would buy a poem. But essentially, I mean, I suppose what he's saying is if poetry is to go on existing, and it's not unimaginable that it won't be there, and that's one of the things that is worth thinking about as well. I mean, we kind of assume that, that poetry, I would assume that it would always be there, but that's maybe a stupid assumption. But anyway, he's saying that if it is to be there, that it kind of has to adapt to whatever the prevailing kind of economic conditions are. It has to deal, whether it's out in the margins, it has to deal with the society that it finds itself in.
Which I think is something that poetry has always done, really, in a way,
yeah,
isn't it?
It has.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting conclusion. I have to say I very much enjoy wandering into the reading world of Peter Sirr. That was really interesting. Thanks, Peter, for that. So that was Peter talking about Peter Robinson's book, Poetry and Money, A Speculation. It's published by Liverpool University Press, and details as usual will be on our website. Thanks for listening.
Precedents. The trams still run on time. People still lie in the sun on our backs in a room. A stack of books is a home. We can still walk in and out of galleries, look at the sky and think it is a paint shade of blue we have waited to see in the city where the trams still run, and we greet each other with smiles and greet each other with smiles. While the trams still run, our hands are not too tight in each other's. And what precedence has this day over any other? We have lived in the cold, where the cold kept us pacing, and our lips moving, and your lips moving, your hand at your ear, where your blood echoes the blue, could be winter blue, where the ice grows grounding, the town, the river beneath, still seething, where nothing appears to move, it is moving, as we are moving in the coarse light of the tram, in the coarse moving lights of the tram.
And that was Leeanne Quinn reading Precedents from her new and second collection, Some Lives, published in 2020 by Daedalus Press. It's a poem I really like for its movement, its pared back beauty, its mesmeric repetition, all qualities, I think, which are very dominant in this new collection of yours, Leeanne. And many thanks for reading it. And you're very welcome today to Books for Breakfast. But just a few words about Leeanne. She was born in Drogheda. She grew up in Monaster Boyce, County Louth. Her debut collection, Before You, was published by Daedalus Press in 2012, and it was highly commended in the Forward Prize for Poetry 2013. Her poems have been widely anthologised, appearing in the Forward Book of Poetry 2013 and Windharp, Poems of Ireland since 1916, among others. She also holds a PhD in American Literature from Trinity College, and her second collection, the one we'll talk about today, Some Lives, as I said, was just published. It's just published by Daedalus Press. She's lived in Dublin for many years and currently lives in Munich, Germany. So it's great to have Leeanne here. So to start off, Leeanne, in a recent article in the Honest Ulsterman, you said moving to Munich shook you up a bit. It set you off in a different kind of tone and timbre, you said, in your poetry. And you began reading the Russian poets. And it's no wonder, really, I suppose, that Some Lives opens with Anna Akhmatova's poem, Without a Hero. Don't dictate to me, I can hear it myself. A warm shower presses on the roof. I hear the ivy whispering. They're beautiful lines. And of course, it's not only Akhmatova, it's also Tsvetaeva, Osip Mandelstam, and the German experimental poet. You spent a lot of time concentrating on his poem Valtanda. So I was just wondering, could you talk to us a little bit about these great Russian writers, and indeed Van Hodus, and why they've inspired you so much and impressed you so much?
Well, I always like to read poetry in translation. And when I moved to Munich, we brought our books with us, and our apartment was very small. So we kind of put a book ban on, and we were like, okay, we definitely can't buy any more books. So I started to just again reread from what I had in my book collection. And one of the books I picked up again was Nadezhda Mandelstam's Hope Against Hope and Hope Abandoned. And I'd read this book in my 20s and was really affected by it. But I just started to read it again and then move again towards the Russian poets. And yeah, I just kind of fascinated by them, obviously by their poetry and their lives. There's a sensibility there that I'm just really drawn to, just really attracted to. I don't know if I could put my finger on it exactly, but there's a directness there. And then, they're vastly different to each other. And that's really appealing as well. They're so unique, so inventive. Yeah, and I'm just really, really drawn to them. And I suppose the move to Munich as well, sparked my interest in German poetry. And my wife Georgina came home with an anthology of German poetry one day. And I found the Jakob van Hodes poem, Welt Ende. And I didn't know this poem. I think it is widely known from what I read and has been anthologized many times, but it certainly wasn't known to me. So yeah, I was just really struck with it. And I remember reading it out to Georgina and saying, look at this. I mean, this could be about the present moment, about the present time and the current environmental crisis. And I was just really, really taken with it. And
Yeah, it's fantastic that going to a new place kind of shakes up all these ideas and gets you going in another direction. Yeah, I think it's really good. And you can feel that energy in the book as well. And I'd mentioned at the start of our chat the kind of mesmeric repetition of the poem Precedence that you read for us. And in your collection, I like the way you play with form, this kind of a dream-like returning to lines used over and over again. I'm thinking of the highly energised poem Elegy, a poem with no punctuation that feels to me kind of like a breathless stream of consciousness fueled by repetition and grief. You say nobody died, nobody mourned, we love a kill, we love a kill, we love a kill, and we love nothing more than to mourn, but nobody died, nobody mourned. Really, really great lines there, Leeanne. Can you speak about the importance of repetition in the form of the book and the turning back of poems on themselves? They kind of reveal new meanings to the reader, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in repetition. I'm really interested in sound. I'm really interested in rhythm. And I suppose repetition kind of plays into all of that. And I think as well, in terms of the themes of the poems and the themes that are in the collection, I was thinking about the past and I think thinking about the present, and I was thinking about repeating cycles. So yeah, I suppose I just started to kind of literalize that through my use of form and just kind of experimenting with repetition. And when you repeat something, do you actually repeat it, or is it changed or altered? And yeah, I'm very kind of drawn to that and just interested in it. So I suppose that's why it does feature, quite a lot in the collection.
Yeah. And also there is, as I said, this kind of pared back beauty, I think, which succeeds in bringing details memorably to the fore. And I'm thinking of the poem The Distant Past, where a man is threatening to toss a mouse live into a pan, or Rings, which includes a train journey and ends, look how far I've travelled to see you. How sand falls like gold from my sleeves. That detail just seems to come out because it is so pared back. And Leeanne, is this kind of pared back style, is it a hard one, or is it something that just kind of naturally comes to you as a poet?
I think it really just naturally comes to me. I don't know whether it's tied to my personality or what, but I'm quite a reticent person, and it seems to kind of suit me. And it's really the only way I seem to be able to write. I always end up, paring things back even more. I think it's just the particular style I have, and just the way poems come to me, and this kind of the stripped back nature of language that I'm kind of drawn to. And maybe that was something with the the work in translation as well, because I often find that it's more economical with language, and I'm kind of really drawn to that as well. A more kind of direct, I suppose, in some ways, sensibility. So yeah, I think it's just as well, just natural to me, I think.
Yeah, well, that's the best approach, I think. And of course, it's not just the Russian poets who inspire you, Leanne. Your poem, The Fear Bulg, it takes its title from a painting by Nana Reid. And the poem, The Good Going Up to Heaven and the Wicked Coming Down, is a title also taken from a painting by her. She grew up, didn't she, in Munster Boyce, your hometown. And I know she's important to you. Could you just say a few words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, she grew up in Drogheda, actually, in the town of Drogheda, where I'm originally from as well. So we moved out to Monaster Boyce when I was in my teens. But yeah, she's a huge inspiration to me. I love her painting. I just absolutely love her paintings. I'm so drawn to them. I think she's just an exceptional artist. And then I'm also drawn to the life and what it was like for her to grow up in Drogheda. And, you know, she lived through so many important events of the 20th century. So I'm kind of intrigued by that, what it was like to be an artist in her time, in her day. Obviously, we know with the founding of like the new state and how difficult that was for women and the kind of role they were cast in. So what it was like to be like a female artist. I guess she was seen as a bit of an oddity and a bit of an eccentricity within the town, but she was really just a very like modern woman who had lived in London, who had spent time in Paris and a lot of time in Dublin as well. So yeah, I'm just really intrigued by her and how she negotiated that.
Yeah, it's great that your poems have brought her again to the fore. And I can't have you here without asking you about Munich. Peter and I are both very jealous we're not there. But it's a city that enters these poems with its weather, its people, its sounds, its sense of place. In your poem, The Fall, the narrator says, "In the bakery I point crumbs of a language, 4 words for goodbye will do." And I suppose there are many ways to say goodbye in German, aren't there? And you'll have to excuse my German now, but I'm thinking of bis später or bis dann or bis bald. I got lessons there from my daughter who studies German, but it did make me wonder though. I mean, you were talking there about translation, but living in Munich as you do, does living where you are and constantly hearing another language affect your own writing, and has it changed your own writing as a result?
Yeah, maybe. I suppose it does make you think more about your own language. And obviously when I came here, I didn't speak German. I had some school German, and I'm still learning. It's definitely still an ongoing process that has been like badly interrupted by the pandemic, because I talk to so few people, especially in German at the moment. So yeah, I think anytime you kind of you learn a new language, it makes you kind of reflect on your own as well. So yeah, I'm sure it has had an impact.
Yeah, it's exciting, I think, for you, Leeanne, to be over there. And I'm looking forward to seeing what new stuff is going to come from your time in Munich as well. So speaking as we were about Nana Reid, it would be lovely to hear your poem Cave of the Fear Bulg, Leeanne. If you would read it for us, that would be great.
Cave of the Fear Bulg. Not even a trespass of sky to compromise the dark, for blood beats in the body of the heart. Nobody thinks, why do we do this? The nervous system ferries its thin shards of glass down among the clay where the blunt flint of the soul remains. Pollen embedded in the riverbed, a prehistory of refuse in the lower layers. Every end is a chance to start over, but the river cannot start again, or the voice in the cave speak in a righteous tongue. The body too gives way as the blood deposits its memory. In the tributaries of the cave, the sky pushed out, the heart yet to know it can go without.
And that was Leeanne Quinn reading Cave of the Fear Bulg from Some Lives, published by Daedalus Press. And now, Leeanne, it was great chatting to you. I think it's time to move on to the Toaster Challenge, where we will not interrupt you, and we're looking forward to hearing you talk about a book which you really love for about 3 minutes. So Peter's getting the bread ready. The toaster will go down. So 1, 2, 3, off you go.
The book I've chosen is Secondhand Time by Svetlana Alexievich, translated by Bela Shevich. Svetlana Alexievich is a Belarusian writer. She was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2015. Alexievich's books are essentially oral histories. She has described herself as an historian of feeling, or a historian of the untraceable. Secondhand Time explores the collapse of the Soviet Union and the effect of that collapse on ordinary men and women of former Soviet states. The book is an astonishing collection of voices. Alexievich is an extraordinary writer. What seems to go hand in hand with that is her ability to listen to elicit narrative from others, to absent herself from the narrative so that others can assume that narrative role. This stepping aside is what I find truly remarkable about her writing. She's a curator of voices. In this book, she listens to narratives of pain and loss, narratives of love, of hope, of guilt, and narratives of disillusionment. She says that she's always listening for that moment when everyday life is transformed into literature. For her, this happens when a person delves deep into themselves, and these moments of delving is what she's there to record. The voices in this book really left such a deep impression on me. The experiences that they describe are often harrowing, upsetting, and disturbing. As I was reading the book, I also realised that I was actually reading a compendium of suicides, and this is really one of the structuring principles of the book. These stories are often told to us by a surviving family member or by a friend, and they're particularly difficult to read. But through these narratives, the book really gets to the kernel of the trauma experienced by people when there's a seismic ideological shift away from the principles of the past into the present order. And it's that trauma that Alexievich is recording in this book. Who was able to adapt and who wasn't. She juxtaposes all of these differing points of view, these different experiences of the past and of the present moment. And the result is this tremendous polyphonic account of Soviet Russia as experienced on the level of the individual. In second-hand time, people try to understand or to come to terms with or defend, as the case may be, not only the inhumane acts of the communist regime, but also the horrific conflicts that emerged after the breakup of the Soviet Union. I think the book is just an astonishing achievement, and this is really true of all her books. The stories in here really don't let you go after you've read them. And while it's certainly a tough read because of the nature of those stories, I feel that it's a necessary read, and I really can't recommend it enough.
Thanks, yeah. And I mean, I think I'm very struck. I mean, it's an amazing book for anybody who hasn't read it. And one of the things I'm grateful for is the chance that you gave me to actually go out and explore it. And because she is such an extraordinary writer, and this is such an amazing book. I mean, it's full of those the things that you say. I mean, the kind of voices of pain and you know, kind of despair, disillusionment, but also that kind of, I mean, that kind of thing that everything that they had believed in for so long just kind of vanished under their feet. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the things I pulled out from it. Like, no one had taught us how to be free. We'd only ever been taught how to die for freedom. And then freedom turned out to mean the rehabilitation of bourgeois existence, which has traditionally been suppressed in Russia. Completely new people appeared. All these young guys in gold rings and magenta blazers. There were new rules. If you have money, you count. No money, you're nothing. Who cares if you've read all of Hegel? Humanity started sounding like a disease. All you people are capable of carrying around, you know, a volume of Mandelstam. You're no use. You're no use to us anymore. But that sense of despair, at the kind of empty acquisitiveness that has replaced communism as a kind of constant refrain, isn't it, throughout the book, that people just don't know what, or people of a particular generation are at a total loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, when a belief system is there, or, you know, even if it's one that is imposed, when it's taken away, people really are at a loss, and people really struggle. And it also almost became like a competition in one way to see who could adapt and who couldn't. And yeah, it's I think she just, you know, she really captures the complexity of it, because it is so complex, especially as, you know, an Irish person coming to this. But I think she, you know, she gives voice to so many people. And the remarkable thing that she does is, like, she gives it without judgment, which is really, really hard to do. But I think she achieves it so well.
It's a funny thing because it's you know, you said you admired her ability to kind of stand aside, and it is unusual, because I can't, you know, it's hard to think. It kind of reminds me of a little bit of somebody like Studs Terkel, the American writer who wrote, you know, books about the Great Depression, Second World War, but, you know, just kind of listening to people as well. But it's not a tradition that's big in English, but the kind of thing of simply, you know, you're reading a long book and it's entirely dominated by the voices of people. So the writer's task is to kind of, in this case, to remove herself. So there's no intervention from her really. So it's the writer as listener. That's kind of the amazing thing. And she has, because, you know, she did a book about Chernobyl. She's Belarusian, as you said, and that hasn't made her very popular. there either. She wrote about Afghanistan. She wrote about what happened to women in the Second World War. All of these things which made her pretty unpopular in various places in Russia. People are divided in their reaction to what she said. In Belarus, it's very difficult for her. So her listening has got her into trouble, hasn't it? A lot.
Absolutely, it has. And I think currently, she left Belarus in September of 2020. And I think she is in Germany now, actually. So she actually said she feared for her safety. So she left. But yeah, it certainly has. It's not the easy path. And what I'm really drawn to her writing is, like, the best writing is writing, I think, that gets beyond the self. And I mean, this is such a prime example of writing that goes beyond the self, and that ability just to abstract yourself like that, I think, is what's really, really remarkable about the books and why I'm drawn to them. And like you mentioned, her other books there, she writes brilliantly on war as well. Yeah, The Boys in Zinc and The Unwomanly Face of War, again, like remarkable books. I could have recommended either of those books as well, but this is the most recent book of hers that I've read.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, and that's great. I mean, because you've made a great case for that book and for Svetlana Alexievich in general. So it would be great. It's a great recommendation, I think, to take away from this. So just to conclude, that was Leeanne Quinn talking, first of all, to Enda about her own new book, Some Lives, published by Daedalus Press. And she was also talking about a book she loves, Secondhand Time, by Svetlana Alexievich, which is published by Fitzcarraldo, who've published so many great books. And the details of both books will be available on booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. So thanks again for that, Leeanne.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again next Thursday morning. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. Yep. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.